The first phase of this course will focus on veterinary entomology. So when we say veterinary entomology, that is the branch of entomology concerned with insects and other arthropods that are parasites or disease vectors affecting animals, especially farm and domestic animals. Hence, this presentation will focus on the phylum Arthropoda. For the outline of this presentation, so the first part of our lecture will focus on an introduction to Phylum Arthropoda. We are also going to discuss or identify the 5 subphyla under the Phylum Arthropoda. And after that, we are going to focus on the class Insecta. And our next topic will be about the body structure of insects. Particularly, we will start with the head. So what is an arthropod? So when we say arthropod, this refers to any member of the phylum Arthropoda. The phylum Arthropoda is considered to be the largest phylum in the animal kingdom. So arthropods are invertebrates with jointed legs. Their bodies are bilaterally symmetrical and segmented. They are the most diverse of all animal life forms. And there are 2 groups are of major veterinary importance, the insects with 6 legs and the arachnids with 8 legs. A 3rd group, the crustacea, contains just a couple of parasitic genera worthy of attention. The phylum Arthropoda may include one of these life forms. We have ticks, beetle, bugs, mosquitoes, crabs, and lobsters, to name a few. About 84% of all known species of animals are members of this phylum. So the science that deals with the study of arthropod is known as arthropodology. The phylum Arthropoda consists of 5 subphyla, namely, first, the Trilobita or the trilobites. We also have the Chelicerata or the arachnids. We also have the subphylum Myriapoda, which includes the millipedes and the centipedes. The subphylum Hexapoda, which includes the insects. And the subphylum Crustacea, which includes the crustaceans. There are 2 groups which are of major veterinary importance, the insects with 6 legs and the arachnids with 8. The subphylum Trilobita is now considered to be extinct, and the remaining 4 as living subphyla. In this subject, we are only going to study the 2 subphyla under the phylum Arthropoda, which are the Hexapoda and the Chelicerata. The subphylum Hexapoda consists of the class Insecta, while the subphylum Chelicerata consists of the class Arachnida, which contains the mites and the ticks. There are 2 groups in the phylum Arthropoda which are of veterinary importance. These include the class Insecta and the class Arachnida. So again, the class Insecta is under the subphylum Hexapoda, and the class Arachnida is under the subphylum Chelicerata. When we say insects, this includes the order Diptera. So when we say Diptera, these are also known as the flies. The order Seponaptera are also known as the fleece, and the order Theraptera are also known as the lice. For the class Arachnida, this includes the order Acarina, which includes the ticks and the mites. The word Arthropoda comes from the Greek word arthros, meaning joint or jointed, and podos, meaning foot, which refers to the fact that members of the phylum Arthropoda have jointed limb. For the 3 main characteristics of the phylum Arthropoda, so they have a hard chitinous exoskeleton, they have a segmented body, and they have a jointed limb. This figure shows some associations between arthropod parasites and the skin. So we have those arthropod parasites that are associated with the skin through blood sucking. So we have ticks as an example. So they are blood suckers. In letter B, we also have those arthropod parasites, which are surface feeders. So they feed particularly on the secretions and the exudates that are present on the skin. So these are exemplified by the muscid fly. We also have those parasites on letter C that are flesh-eating. So they are also known as, the infection is also known as cutaneous miasis. In letter D, we also have those arthropod parasites, which are surface feeding on the skin debris. So example of this are the chewing louse. We also have on letter E, we have also the arthropod parasites which are burrowing. So these are exemplified by the burrowing mite. And we also have those arthropod parasites that are developing under the skin. So these are exemplified by the warble fly. And we also have those arthropod parasites that are found in the hair follicle. Example are the mites that live on the hair follicle. So the slides to follow will focus on the broad spectrum of the insect world. For the taxonomic classification of insects, so they belong to the kingdom Animalia, of the phylum Arthropoda or the arthropods, and the subphylum Hexapoda or the hexapods. So insects is considered to be a class, so it is called as class Insecta. It can also be rephrased as the class Insecta is under the subphylum Hexapoda, and the subphylum Hexapoda is under the phylum Arthropoda, and the phylum Arthropoda belongs to the kingdom Animalia. The class Insecta or the insects is under the subphylum Hexapoda or the hexapods. Hexapoda is the largest subphylum within the phylum Arthropoda in terms of the described species. The subphylum name refers to the presence of 6 feet, 3 pairs of thoracic legs present in some life stage of all hexapods. 2 other characteristics are the 3 major body regions, the head, the thorax and the abdomen, and a single pair of antennae. Entomology is the scientific study of insects. Insects, which belong to the taxonomic group Hexapoda, are the most successful organisms on Earth if biodiversity is concerned. The word insect comes from the Latin word insectum, meaning with a notched or divided body, or literally cut in two. The insects of greatest concern in clinical practice are the fleas, lice, and flies, although there are many others that can adversely affect animal and human health by means of bites, stings, blister-inducing venoms or irritating hairs, all of which can induce allergies and sometimes anaphylaxis. Insects also destroy and foul feedstuffs. Cockroaches are particularly adept at contaminating food and other surfaces by the mechanical transfer of pathogens. There are 4 major orders of class Insecta that are of veterinary importance. This includes the order Hemiptera, which are also known as the bugs, the order Diptera, which have a common name, flies, the order Theraptera, or the lice, and the order Seponaptera, or the fleece. At first sight, the technical names given to the major groups of insects look daunting, but they are easier to remember if their composition is understood. The key derivations are from ancient Greek words, "terra" meaning wings, and "a" which means no, thus loosely translated as Seponaptera. So when we say Seponaptera, that comes from the words siphon, meaning siphoning mouth part, "a" means no, and "terra" means wings. So we can say that the Members of the order Seponaptera have a siphoning mouthpart and they also have no wings. So the members of the order Seponaptera are also known as the fleece. Another group or another order is the Theraptera. So this comes from the word ther, and terra. When we say ther, that is a Greek word meaning louse. Means no, and terra means wings. So we can say that members of this order are classified as lice or louse, having no wings. So these are examples of the lice that comes from cattle. We also have the order Hemiptera. So the names of this order comes from the word hemi, which means half, and ptera meaning wings. So this refers to the top pair of wings being partly thickened and partly membranous. So an example of this order is the bedbug or the Simex lectularius. We also have the order Diptera. So the order name comes from the word di, which means two, and terra meaning wings. So this is an important diagnostic characteristic as all other flying insects have four wings. So the order Diptera are also known as the flies. Let's now proceed to the key concepts that describe the class Insecta or the insects. Let us begin with the body structure of insects. So why there is a need to study the body structure of insects? So a general appreciation of the body structure and function of the parasites or insects is needed at a practical level because first, it is helpful in diagnosis and in the accurate recognition of the pathogen. Secondly, it aids in the understanding of the key biological features that influence the epidemiology, pathogenesis, or control of related disease processes. In terms of the body structure, the insect body is divided into three distinct regions: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Three distinct body regions of the insect can be clearly illustrated by the sheephead, Melophagus ovinus. So we have here, the diagram of a sheephead showing the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. So other features of this insect include the presence of the exoskeleton. So the entire surface is covered by hard, protective, non-cellular exoskeleton, which is secreted by an underlying epidermis. The exoskeleton has three cuticular layers containing chitin, which provide mechanical support. The chitin molecules are sometimes cross-linked for extra strength. The insect head is sometimes referred to as the head capsule and is the insect's feeding and sensory center. It also acts to support the eyes, the mouth parts, and a single pair of antennae covered with sensory hairs and bristles. Note that insects do not breathe through their mouths, but through their thoracic and abdominal spiracles. This diagram is the frontal view of the insect's head. As you can notice, the head capsule of the matured insect can be differentiated into several regions by the presence of sutures or sulcus. For the different regions of the insect head, so this include the fronts, FRO and S. So this is the upper mid portion of the insect's face. Below the fronts is the clypeus, and below the clypeus is the labrum. To either side are the mandibles. The labrum is equivalent to the insect's upper lip and is generally movable. Again, the head sutures are present, which are important to differentiate the head of the insect into several regions. So the head sutures are also known as the sulcus. Example of this is the frontoclypeal sulcus, which is a suture that differentiates or that delineates the boundary between the frons and the clypeus. So other parts of the insect's head include the vertex. So the vertex is located above the frons. We also have the genna, which are located on the sides of the head, and particularly on the sides of the frons. For the eyes of the insects, so the eyes vary greatly in complexity from simple ocelli, which monitor light intensity, to compound eyes made up of a honeycomb-like congregation of thousands of tubes, each covered by a cornea and containing sensory cells. These are sensitive to movement. Ocelli, singular ocellus, is Latin and means little eye. 1 to 3 ocelli can be found in many insects, located at the different positions on their heads. Ocelli have evolved as a second visual system, in addition to the compound eyes that insects are famous for. Most flying insects have ocelli, while those that never get airborne usually don't have ocelli. So this diagram here represents the head of a blowfly, Lucilia. So it has 3 ocelli and compound eyes. And it has also a pair of antennae with sensory hairs and bristles. So we have here an overview of the head of the simple fruit fly, Drosophila melanogaster. The diagram shows the 7 eyes of Drosophila, consisting of the 2 compound eyes and 3 ocelli, and the modified Baldwin organs or the HV islets. The compound eyes of Drosophila is reportedly responsible for capturing the main share of visual information. The triplet of ocelli, which are embedded in the dorsal head cuticle, is thought to detect the horizon and assist in the flight control. So this is a photograph of the head of the species of a dragonfly, Hemcordulia tau. The ocelli are located anterior to the prominent compound eyes. So the CE here represents the compound eyes of this dragonfly species. The median ocellus is represented by this arrow, and it is recessed into a groove above the frons. The frons, the FR here represents the frons, and the VER here represents the vertex of the head. This diagram shows the top view of the blowfly head, showing the location of the compound eyes and the ocelli of the blowfly. So this one here represents the left compound eye. This one here represents the right compound eye. This one, as seen in the diagram, there are 3 ocelli. We have the left ocelli, or the left lateral ocelli, the right lateral ocelli, and the median ocelli. The left and the right ocelli integrate light from extended areas. centered about 45 degrees above the horizon, in the left and right part of the lateral field of the vision, respectively. The medial ocelli, or the medial ocelus, monitors the dorsofrontal part of the surroundings. Let's now proceed to the insect mouth parts. The most primitive of insect mouth parts are like these, shown in this figure on a grasshopper. The grasshopper have a chewing mouth parts. So the basic parts of these type of mouth parts are the labrum. So the labrum is like the upper lip, closing the food canal from above. We also have the mandibles. The mandibles are on the sides of the mouth and have teeth on them for grinding food. There is also the maxilla on each side, attaching just behind the mandibles. Then we have the labium. The labium serves as the lower lip, closing the food channel from below. The maxilla and the labium have appendages on them, called as the maxillary and the labial palps, respectively. These are segmented and function to feel, taste, and manipulate the food almost like a fork with nostrils and taste buds. The primitive arrangement of the mouth parts can also be seen in cockroaches. Here, they are used for biting. There are 5 different structures which are used for the initial collection and processing of food in this insect. So this diagram shows the disassembled parts of the mouth parts of cockroaches. The first is the labrum. The labrum is the upper lip. We also have the mandibles. So the mandibles are also known as the cutting jaws. We also have the maxillae. The maxillae are also known as the pincers, and they are used to steady and manipulate the food. They have 5 segmented pulp, which is sensory in function and concerned with taste, and they are known as the maxillary pulp. We also have the labium, or the lower lip. The labium contains the labial pulp, which are 3 segmented, and is also function as a sensory. We also have the hypopharynx, which is not shown. This is a tongue-like structure in the floor of the mouth, and it is a protuberance like a drinking straw that channels saliva to where it is needed. This system remains little changed in all insects which chew their food, both larvae and adults. Where specialized food sources have been exploited, the mouth parts are modified, sometimes vary considerably, so that the food may be obtained satisfactorily. There are 4 different types of mouth parts. So again, the most primitive one that we have already discussed is the chewing mouth parts. We also have the piercing and sucking mouth parts, the siphoning mouth parts, and the biting and lapping mouth parts. So the chewing mouth parts is again considered to be the most primitive type, and all other mouth parts are derived from them. So this is a beetle. A beetle has a chewing mouth parts. This type of mouth part is suited only for the utilization of solid food. These are the insects with chewing mouth parts or mouth designs. So we have here the grasshopper. We also have the beetles and the chewing lice. This diagram shows the grasshopper with mandibulate mouth parts. So the other name of a chewing mouth part is mandibulate mouth parts. We have here a diagram showing the disassembled parts of the mandibulate mouth parts of a grasshopper. So among the structures that can be found in this picture are the labrum. So the labrum can be described as a broad rectangular plate. We also have here the mandibles. So the mandibles are described as horny and with tooth inner margins for chewing food. We also have a pair of maxilla. These are used in manipulating food as it enters the mouth. We also have the broad median labium, which serve to hold the food worked on by mandibles and maxillae. So these are the basic parts of a mandibulate or a chewing mouthparts. The next type is the piercing and sucking mouthparts. So the insects like mosquito and true bugs have piercing and sucking mouthparts. So their mouthparts have been modified to pierce into flesh or plants to suck out blood or plant sap, respectively, with straw made by a channel in the labium. So we have here a schematic diagram showing the piercing and sucking mouthparts. So the insects with piercing and sucking mouthparts or mouth designs include the flies, particularly the horsefly, the mosquito, the aphids. Now we also have the fleece. Now they also have a sucking mouthparts. So this diagram shows the head of a female culisine mosquito, showing the components of the mouthparts spread out from the labium. So the labrum, you have here the labrum of the mouthpart of a mosquito. We also have here the mandible and the maxilla. So these three, now the labrum, the mandible, and the maxilla or the maxillae are slender and long and fit together to form a delicate hollow needle. The labium forms a stout sheath that holds this needle rigid. We also have here another diagram showing a light micrograph of a malaria mosquito of the Anopheles species with the labeled mouthparts. So this portion here, or this structure represents the antennae. We also have here the labrum, the maxillary pulps that of course arises from the maxilla. We also have here the proboscis. The proboscis has the labium and the labella. So this is another diagram of the different parts of mosquito mouth parts. So we have here two figures showing the different structures found on the mosquito mouth parts. So the first structure here in this figure is the proboscis. The proboscis is the exterior feeding structure of the mosquito. And in this diagram, the proboscis also contains the unretracted labium. We also have the stylet. So the stylet is a term for the mouthparts which pierce and enter the skin during feeding. So this includes the maxillae, the mandible, the labrum, and the hypopharynx. So this MX here, or the one in red, is the maxillae. The M here represents the mandible. The H here, the green one, represents the hypopharynx, and the blue one represents the labrum. So collectively, they are known as stylet. We also have the fascicle. So when we say fascicle, it is a term for a collection of stylets. In this case, it is comprised of a pair of maxillae. Now we have here a pair of mandibles and the labrum as well as the hypopharynx. We also have the labium. The labium is the outer sheath of the proboscis. So in here, you have the proboscis. This whole structure is the proboscis, and its outer part or its outer sheath is known as the labium, no, as shown in this figure. We also have the labella. The labella is the tip of the labium. The labella is the tip of the labium. It contains two sensory probes which aid the mosquito in its search for a good place to bite. This part, in conjunction with the labium, could also be described as the lips of the mosquito. We also have the maxillae. So the one in red is the maxillae. The maxillae are serrated structures used to saw through the skin. A mosquito's mouth is an elongated version of a typical insect mouth. We also have the mandible. The mandible or it functions not to hold the tissues apart. The next are the labrum. So this one here, this blue one here is the labrum. It acts as a probe searching for a blood vessel beneath the skin. Receptors in the labrum can detect blood as if following a scent, leading it directly to the closest blood vessel. So once it finds and pierces a vessel, the gutter-shaped labrum sucks in the blood with the help of the hypopharynx. We also have the hypopharynx. So the hypopharynx is the light green one. It begins pumping the saliva into the victim as soon as the fascicle pierces the skin to stave off the immune response, lubricate the proboscis, keep the blood from coagulating, and dilate the blood vessels. This piece could be thought of as the tongue of the mosquito. So those are the important mouth parts of the mosquito. So we have here the proboscis. This portion here are the stylet. We have here the labium. It is located in the proboscis. We also have the labella at the tip. We also have here the maxillae, the mandible, the labrum, and the hypopharynx. The next type is the biting and lapping mouthparts. So this type of mouthparts have been modified into swords which slash at the flesh until a pool of blood appears. Then, using the labium, modified it into a sponge. They sponge up the blood. The reason deerfly and horsefly bites hurt so much is because they are hacking at the skin with those swords. So an example of insects having a biting and lapping mouthparts are the deerfly and the horsefly. So this is a front and lateral view of the head of a female horsefly exhibiting a biting and a lapping mouthparts. So this structure here represents, the MP here represents the maxillary pulp, the LA here represents the labrum, and the ST here represents the stylet. We also have here a closer look on the mouthparts of a female horsefly viewed from the front. So the important structures of these particular biting and lapping mouthparts of the horsefly are the You have here the labella. Also have here the maxilla or the maxillae, and the also have here the labrum and the maxillary pulp. This one here is the labrum, and the hypopharynx is behind the labrum. We also have here the a side view of the mouth parts of a female horsefly, showing the labella, the labrum, the maxilla, the mandible, and the maxillary pulp. We also have the sponging mouth parts. So sponging insects feed on exposed liquids such as nectar or sap, or by dissolving solid substances, sugar, in their saliva. So an example of a diptera with a sponging mouth part is the common housefly. The word sponging describes the function of the mouth parts, which acts like a sponge to absorb food in liquid form. These are the important anatomical features of a sponging mouth part. First, the mandibles and the maxillae of the insects having sponging mouth part are considered to be non-functional. A common example of a sponging mouth part is exhibited by the common housefly, Musca domestica. So the following are some of the adaptive features of the common housefly with sponging mouthparts. First, the mouthparts consist of an elbowed labium that has a fleshy look. At the end of the labium, there is a large sponge-like organs called the labellum or the labella. The hairs usually surround the mouthparts. This is to retain moisture on the fly, thus keeping water loss from the body at a minimum level. The labella is a very complex structure that contains many grooves known as the pseudotracheae. The structure is very important as it sucks up liquids like a sponge. The saliva is also released from the labella to help dissolve and collect food particles. Once the liquid food is drawn by the pseudotrachea, it will pass through the food channel into the esophagus. Sponging mouthparts, flies cannot bite or chew food except for tsetse, horsefly, and deerfly. Higher diptera, such as the houseflies, have lost their mandibles and maxillae, an organ which helps in the biting and chewing process. This figure shows the structure of the sponging mouth part of a housefly. And we also have here the figure showing the sponge structure of the insect mouth part that helps in the absorption of food. The next type is the siphoning mouth parts. So this type of mouth part draw up fluid nectar from the flower, and the type of food that are being obtained are the nectar, water, salt, and minerals in the liquid. The labrum of this mouth part is considered to be reduced. So these are the insects with siphoning mouth parts. So these are the butterfly and the moth. So we have here a diagram of a typical siphoning mouth part of a butterfly. To describe the structure, the features of the siphoning mouth part, so the labrum of a siphoning mouth part is considered to be narrow and band-like. The mandibles are considered to be reduced. The maxillary pulps are vestigial. We also have here the galea. The galea is long and deeply grooved to form the proboscis. The labium is reduced and bears three jointed pulps known as the labial pulps. The hypopharynx in a siphoning mouth part is absent. The development of insect mouthparts from the primitive chewing mouthparts of a grasshopper, as shown in the center in letter A, to the lapping type of a bee, as shown here in letter B, to the siphooning type, as shown in letter C for a butterfly, and the sucking type, as shown here in letter D, of a female mosquito. So this structure here represents the disassembled parts of a typical mouth part of an insect. So these structures include the mandible, the maxillae, and the labrum. So insects often have different feeding behaviors in their juvenile and adult stages with correspondingly dissimilar mouth parts. So we have here a diagram of the head end of a blowfly larvae or maggot showing the chitinous mouth parts as seen on this particular diagram. So when we are going to compare this to the adult fly, so we can see now that the mouth part of this particular blowfly is different from the mouth part of the adult fly. For example, the common housefly musca. The common housefly musca has a spongy mouth part. Meanwhile, this particular blowfly larvae has a different mouth part. Now it has the presence of a chitinous, lacerating structure of this particular larvae. So this can be attributed to the feeding behavior of this blowfly larvae. So the larvae of most of the species of the blowfly are considered to be scavengers that live on carrion or dung. The larvae or the maggots feed on decaying flesh. This can explain the structure of its mouth parts, which is chitinous and lacerating. So in many cases, the sexes utilize different food sources, with males taking nectar from the flowers while females also seek protein meals. This is often blood in the case of parasitic insects. So for example, we have the mosquitoes, and the female feeds on blood while the male mosquitoes feed on nectar.